The fourth episode of Ryan Murphy's Feud anthology series on FX, Feud Capote vs. the Swans, concluded with a moving dance between Babe and Bill Paley, and a memorial to the late great Treat Williams. This week's episode 5 transports us back to November 1975 to relive the seminal Esquire story. We return to 1975, the day following the publication of the Esquire Answered Prayers excerpt. Babe is enraged at both her husband and Truman, the other love of her life. Furthermore, Truman feels lost and unsure of how to proceed. Truman's incapacity to predict the reactions of his swans, Baby in particular, has been witnessed previously. Finally, though, we are shown what brought Truman out of his funk, none other than James Baldwin, who spends a day with Capote conversing, eating, and drinking until he finally realizes what it was about answered prayers that initially drew him in. By the end of the episode, the author of In Cold Blood is eager to pick up his pen once more and kill and feast on the swans he once loved. Nothing in the public record, at least, points to the existence of such a meeting, much less the narratively convenient time Feud assigns it. Furthermore, given Truman's numerous inebriated mishaps, it is plausible that this entire encounter is a fevered dream, employed by Feud and its fictional Capote to conjure up an all-too-didactic dialogue, while furthering the notion that, despite Truman's gradual decline into madness, he is still aware of the tasks at hand in order to complete answered prayers. It has to do with a swan sacrificed at the dinner table. Let's face it, a show like Feud was bound to make artistic license. Using the Maisels' footage as the structuring premise to emphasize how Capote's swans were the original housewives of Aunt Bellettre was creative, and I applauded it for doing so during the Masquerade Ball episode. However, I find it difficult to understand how the most well-known black gay novelist of his generation can be reduced to a plot device that helps our white protagonist from the South find his path. Baldwin reminds Truman that he is, quote, the toughest little faggot in town at the perfect moment, first via phone and later in person at La Côte Basque, when Truman is at his lowest. Babe and the other swans are, in a sense, reacting to him since he is the only one who can help his friend and occasionally naughty adversary remember that he is an author to be feared. Now that we've addressed the obvious criticism of the main idea of this episode, I will concede that there are some aspects of these two literary characters entirely made up together that work well. Someone like Baldwin would need to poke fun at Truman, just enough to force him to acknowledge that being white allowed him access to places that Baldwin is unable to, all the while skillfully articulating how class and race, not to mention sexuality, are fundamental to the way Truman's swans are able to navigate the world. Baldwin states at one point that it is impossible for a white person, or an American white person, to not be in some fundamental sense a racist. The attempt here is to interpret Truman's observations via the prism that Baldwin employed to comprehend American society. If Truman had trouble compiling his thoughts on his swans into something noteworthy, something worthy of Proust, after publishing La Côte Basque, it would be necessary to go beyond gossip to the point of presenting Babe and the other swans as symbols of an America that was just as corrupt and decaying as the European society that they so desperately tried to imitate. Feud recognizes that Baldwin is in a better position to condense Truman's anecdotes into more comprehensive criticisms. Baldwin, like Albert Maysles of the Masquerade episode, acts as a foil to whom Truman can express the very things that occupied his letters and notebooks, biting comments about the swans that, according to Feud's version of Truman, he'd excluded from La Côte Basque, because he was targeting the men, not the women. As he converses with Baldwin, we get an eloquent Capote who maybe could have transformed answered prayers into the brilliant, perceptive, and honest work that its author had envisioned. Consequently, The Secret Inner Lives of Swans uses Baldwin as a springboard for Capote to uncover all the material he had been leaving out of answered prayers. In doing so, the story accomplishes in 1 hour on television what the original short story did not. It exposes the swans' true nature and feelings of hollowness and hatred. Could Baldwin's biology lessons on real swans have been skipped, especially the bits about how strong gay swans are? Indeed, mostly because they perceive a lack of the kind of refined writing for which the author was renowned both then and particularly now. Baldwin and Capote's talk reveals more about the lives of Babe, Slim, Lee, Anne, and CZ than any previous episode does as they dine at La Côte Basque, browse abstract artworks, and enjoy cocktails at the library, a well-known pub in Manhattan. From a narrative perspective, it seems as though Feud started by just showcasing the swans to Truman, highlighting only their most exquisite flaws, such as Babe's beauty. But now that Baldwin is in charge, we can finally take a close look. A crude Slim employs self-deprecating humor, stating, "Formidable excellence is code for a dry hump," to highlight how their gossip serves as a means of preserving their own social standing. We witness a conceited Lee choosing to have surgery. Everything the Swans do is skin deep, and advising Truman to look after himself better. He appears incredibly worn out, particularly after appearing on television. All that perfection dissolving, we see an inebriated Babe interrupting her daughter's birthday party with the comment, "All my Swans are terrible mothers." Additionally, we witness Babe and Lee teaming up to humiliate Anne in an immoral act of social cruelty. They have no ounce of humility or compassion, which sets up the most delectable word Feud has yet to use. The day helps to restore Truman's skill and wisdom, and helps him let go of his concerns about what he might do to his Swans. It concludes in a manner that is aptly operatic. Not only has Truman supposedly completed writing answered prayers, he has reportedly read a large portion of it to Joan Carson, but he has also managed to persuade a dashing waiter chef turned one envy to kill a swan and prepare it for him. All the while the background trills of Henry Purcell's opera Dido and Aeneas, Dido's lament. Once more, everything seems a little too obvious, but there's no disputing that it's a powerful method to highlight Capote's comeback. However, we already know where that ultimately takes him. Capote, who only last week compared himself to Prometheus, is now compared to Oppenheimer, the American Prometheus. The Oscar FEUD campaign is going too far. Anyone who has seen Capote, 2005, will undoubtedly recall the pivotal Baldwin reference that sets up Truman's confrontation with In Cold Blood. He playfully teases what he thought of Jimmy after telling the assembled guests that he had lunch with him the other day. He's a lovely man. Also, he gave me the synopsis of his newest work. He continued, saying, "I just wanted to make sure it's not one of those problem novels." "Jimmy," I then remarked, "the protagonist of your work is a black gay who has a Jewish partner. Would you not consider that to be an issue?" The comment was supposed to be biting, but Philip Seymour Hoffman was able to give it the right amount of bitterness by making it feel so purposefully self-directed. This takes us to the one point that readers of Baldwin Capote would be more familiar with. He discussed his thoughts on his fellow writer in great detail in a 1962 letter to Newton Arvin, writing, "I detest Jimmy's fiction. It is badly written and of an aching boredom. Sometimes I do believe his pieces to be at least insightful, even though they nearly always conclude on a phony, hymn-singing note." Feud at least suggests this form of rivalry, with Jimmy and Truman acknowledging that perhaps the reason they were so devoted to one another was because they valued each other's contributions so highly. What about other gay writers of the era, such as Gore Vidal? Gore? Truman stammers, "He's dancing with delight in my bad luck," holding a doll. If nothing else, this episode ought to spark interest in Hollywood for a full-fledged limited series centered around the group of LGBT authors and artists from the mid-1900s. Who wouldn't want to watch Truman and Vidal together? Williams-wise? The list is endless.